Hello and welcome to the annual Write Hive conference. This year is packed with a ton of great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and the publishing industry. Write Hive is a nonprofit serving the writing community with free and inclusive resources, events, programming, connections, and more. The 2025 conference brings you this session, Shared Worlds. So let's kick things off by having you introduce yourself and tell us briefly about the shared world in which you write.
Sure. Hi, I'm J.R. Hart, and I have written in a shared world called Clover Hill. It's a queer small town, and it consisted of multi-author space for queerness of kind of all different parts of the LGBTQ plus spectrum. So our shared world featured characters who were trans, characters who were in male-female bi pairings, which isn't something that you see a lot of rep in romance. Featured asexual, agender, aromantic characters, and it was just kind of a space that was kind of inclusive to the full LGBTQ umbrella.
So I'm G Clatworthy. I'm an urban and cozy fantasy writer based over here in the UK. And when I'm not writing, I enjoy eating chocolate, drinking tea, and I've got a young family and 2 cats as well. So it's all busy here, but very much enjoy kind of making mundane things magical. That's what I tend to do. I write in a shared world called Cozy Vales, which is a cozy fantasy world. And the book that you can see here, A Colour to Die For, is set in that cozy shared world.
And I'm the moderator, Dawn Vogel, and I am a writer and editor in a superhero shared world setting that has about 6 primary authors, and we write things that span time and also alternate universes. So it's an unusual sort of shared world. All right, so our first question is, let's get sort of a definition on the table. What are multi-author series or shared worlds?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, it sounds like you have a very different shared world kind of take than what our shared world series was set in, the one that I worked on. So for us, ours was a shared world or multi-author series where we were all occupying the same small town. So all of our books occupied the same small town. The characters all inhabited spaces within that small town, went to the same businesses, went and interacted with some of the same characters. So we had a set of NPCs that were kind of fair game to play with. So for us, shared world very much looked like how you would live in a small town here. If you were just to live in a small town, you would run into the same people at the grocery store, perhaps, or at the coffee shop. And multi-author series would simply look like several authors writing books within a series where each book might have a different author or authors within that series.
And I will say that for the shared world that I write in, we do have most of what's going on set in the same series or in the same city. So we do have some of that where there are overlapping NPCs, like you said, that show up. And even if you're writing focused on one main character that you tend to write, you can still use the other characters that are in the city, the other superheroes. So you can have like a superhero team up where you're writing one character and then seeing how it works when they team up with somebody else.
The world I write in is a world where we have some shared characters and shared locations, but we also have some separate locations and separate characters. So it's sort of like having a big sandbox that you can play in as an author, where there are some things that are predefined and there's certain ways that some parts of the world work, like magic systems, for example. But at the same time, there's lots of room for creativity because you can have your own space within that and really carve out your own unique voice, your unique characters and things. So in my book, A Colour to Die For example, which is set in a vale within the Cozy Vales queendom called Saffron Vale. That's very much a separate Vale, which is my own kind of one where there's, you know, distinct traditions, distinct laws in some cases, and characters, and settings, kind of scenery, geography, even weather patterns, which it's no coincidence might be very similar to some of the places that I love here in the UK, but very different to other veils that other authors have in the same world, where they might be writing in like a desert world with kind of different species that might be unique to their area as well.
All right. So our next question is, how do you find authors who would be good fits for shared worlds? Or alternately, how do you find a shared world for which you're a good fit as an author?
That's a great question for anyone considering a shared world. So how I got involved with Cozy Veils was an author that I had heard of. I think we might have been on a podcast together in urban fantasy, put up a post in a Facebook group, a Cozy Facebook group that I'm part of, saying that they had had this idea. So Scott Walker, writing as L.A. Scott, had this idea for this queendom. Would any other authors be interested? And it came at a time when I was thinking about, you know, maybe doing something a little different to urban fantasy, and I love the cozy fantasy genre, so it felt right for me at the time. Scott, I'll give him all the credit. He did lots of work in arranging Zoom calls for all the prospective authors to kind of come together. He had an idea of what the world would be, but he was very open to other people's inputs as well. And yeah, it all sort of goes from there. But I think whoever's hosting the world, you have to have a good amount of trust in. And this sounds very woolly, but you kind of get a vibe as to whether it's a world you're going to enjoy being part of or not. And the other really important thing that Scott arranged that gave me a lot of comfort was all the legal side as well. So we all have contracts. You know, the basic premise is that the books that I write, so the Saffron Veil series, for example, is mine. I can keep all the royalties from it. But if there were kind of other things, that's all, you know, it's all written down and we all know. And if there's going to be anything new in the future, we're all aware of it on the Discord channel and everything like that. So I think that communication is really important. And as well as kind of the legal side, there's a shared world source book, which we all have access to and can read. There's species lists, so like entities lists. There's lists of common people or shared characters, fauna, flora, foods. So it gets quite detailed, and anyone can propose anything, but it all has to be sort of cleared by the other people who are part of this world as well. So we have really good debates on Discord when something's proposed. I know I've proposed a few things, and what I've found is when I propose them, I have an idea in my head, but I don't necessarily articulate it well enough to get it across to others on the first outing. So having it on Discord with a thread really helps. People can ask questions and I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Or actually what I had in my mind was something different to maybe what I wrote initially or how someone's interpreted it. So we can really, get the parts that are shared really common so people understand them. And then obviously there are parts that are separate as well that, we can all keep.
I don't have much experience for finding an existing shared world in terms of, for us, it was largely about kind of creating the space that we wanted to see. When we were looking for authors that would be a good fit, the main criteria that we had is that we wanted to find other authors that shared the same vision for the world as us. And when we were initially starting, our project was not designed to be a shared world initially. We just knew that we wanted to do a multi-author project, and had assumed like maybe we would do a similar theme. And it was once we had gathered the authors together that we ultimately settled on a shared world. Um, but for us, when we were looking for authors, we knew that, especially in romance and LGBTQ plus romance spaces, there were large trends of, cishet women writing a lot of like gay male books, and there were a lot of trends of, very male dominated spaces. And so what we wanted to make sure that we did, not that we wanted to exclude people, but that we wanted to make sure that we had a lot more representation of different genders writing within our project. So it wouldn't just be very heavily, cishet women writing within the space, that it wouldn't just largely be that we were only going to get like male romance in our series. And so when we were looking for authors, we tried to look for authors that had experience writing with different pairings, or that wrote largely from different lenses, or had their own kind of voice that they might bring to the table. And so for us, a lot of it was, what lens is this person bringing to the table, and what do they typically write that might be different or underrepresented in romance than what we typically hear? Because we knew that we had an opportunity to create a world that was kind of almost, one, realistic, but also two, a more idealized version of what you would see in a small town. We wanted this to be your cozy small town, but also a safe space where anyone of any type of queerness could be seen and represented and comfortable. And then another thing that we really looked for is, we wanted people who might be newer to writing. So we had a few first-time authors join, but it was people that we knew were trying to break into the writing space. And we knew also that we wanted some people who had some experience, so it could be more of like a, not necessarily a mentorship in the traditional sense, but that people who had some experience could kind of step in and pull people up that were wanting to learn more, wanting to learn some of those skills in um, writing and editing, and how to kind of put those stories together. And so this kind of presented an opportunity to do that.
I love all of that. I love the small town that's a safe, cozy place, and I love the helping newer writers get sort of their feet underneath of them with assistance from people who are more experienced. For our shared world, most of the people who have written in it, we know each other in person. And so some of it was, one person created the shared world and then said, "Hey, would you all like to come play in my sandbox?" And that started out looking like short stories in anthologies. So we would have a theme for an anthology. We'd all write a short story sort of speaking to that theme. And then from there, it branched into people writing novellas, and then people writing novels. And now we've got people writing entire series of multiple books. One of the authors currently is finishing book 4 of a 6-book planned series. So it's like a big story arc that he's working on. And so, we've got all these sort of disparate pieces, but they're all sort of connected at the core. Next question that we have is, how do you ensure the world building remains consistent in multi-author series?
This one is kind of a harder piece. I mean, for us, one thing that we really did focus on was creating a good core of NPCs that people could work with, and businesses that anyone could tap into. And so we had a nice story Bible where all of that was laid out. And I have to really say that this was kind of a, a big strength of some of the other authors that I do not share. Like, I am not big on organizing when I write a story individually. I'm kind of one of those people that I start and I write to the finish, and then I finish it, and then I go back and edit. And so I'm not great at keeping track of a lot of those side characters. So I'm very, very thankful to the other authors who wrote in the Clover Hill series for keeping such good track of that. But having that pool to choose from was great, because we could kind of say, this is what this character looks like. These are some phrases that they might use. These are some ways that they might interact with others. Here's where they work. Here's what they do. And then knowing that anyone could pull from those and use them is very, very helpful to that consistency. One struggle that we did have is that, because it was kind of a linear release series, in that everyone kind of said, this is when we're going to release. We're going to release a book every 2 weeks for X amount of months. As people had some like life events come up and they had to have situations where they might have to push their book back a little longer, we had a couple of instances come up where someone's characters from their book might make a cameo in another person's book. But if a book got pushed back, then that cameo might have to get adjusted because this person might be referencing events that have not taken place yet. So we had continuity errors that we had to come back and adjust, where this person might be referencing an established couple where their book won't come out for another month, and that's not an established couple yet. Or they reference a business opening and that business doesn't open for another 2 months because that book had to get pushed back. So for us, I feel like if we had to do things over again, I think having less reliance on characters that weren't other people's characters and more reliance on those shared NPCs would have been a lot more beneficial, because it's when you dip into things happening in other storylines, you have those issues that if things have to get moved, you're having to go back and rewrite a whole scene or go back and rewrite a whole chapter. And that can be so much more difficult.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the difficult parts of it. And our shared world, because it does span time, we've got some people who are writing in what is essentially the now, but then we have some people writing what are essentially flashback stories that sort of inform the now. But so there's a lot of a balancing act between, well, okay, if this character is in this area doing this at this time period, what does that say for the rest of the characters or the world or things like that? But we also have essentially what is a world Bible. We use an online wiki for that. And we all have the ability to edit it and to add things. So if we come up with a new character, we can toss that on there and then other people can look at that. We've also, because I am a very, very organized person, and as the series editor, I like to have all this stuff where I can easily access it. We actually set up a characters by decades page so that you can go to a given decade and see which characters were active in that period. And that way, if you're looking for one of those sort of side characters or NPCs to bring in, you can say, oh, okay, let me see what information we have on this hero who was operating in this time frame. And if there's nothing there, you can sort of look and see who created that page and say, hey, I'm thinking about using this character. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think the source book is the main one, and the shared kind of entities, flora and fauna sheets that I've already mentioned. The Discord server is also a massive part of it as well. So if anybody's got any questions or even ideas, like people can hop on there any stage they're at and say, hey, I'm thinking about this, or I'm thinking my story should have this happen. Does that make sense? So I'll give you an example. There's a shared species called a Tuluan, which is an owl type person. So that's like really fun to write, and they do have wings, but we didn't actually have it specified whether they could fly or not. And they walk on kind of 2 feet, normally, if you imagine like a hobbit, but an owl, that's sort of what they are. So I have a Tuluan in my series and I wanted them to glide for one part, and I was like, oh, I don't actually know if they can do that. So let me hop on. I'll ask the question openly, making sure I tag the person who kind of proposed them originally. And then we had a conversation about, yes, they could absolutely glide like I wanted them to. And then we could make any changes to the species list as well to make it clear for future authors, because as the world gets bigger, I think initially we were all able to read each other's short stories. So an anthology is where it started. And I do still read all the anthology stories, but not always before publication now, because the world is just getting bigger, which is fabulous. But yeah, as more stories and more novels and things come out in the world, it's going to be really challenging for everyone to read everything. So I think having that place where things like, currencies, customs, sayings, it's all really helpful to have that written down, and then authors can use them if they want to. But equally, in some cases it doesn't matter, but having them there, I think, adds a richness to the world. And it's really great, to just drop in a few like common phrases makes it feel like the world's much more connected. So that's how we tend to use it, how I've seen it been used.
Our next question is there anything to be aware of before agreeing to join a multi-author series or shared world?
Yeah, so I think that's really dependent on what the multi-author series or world is and what it's trying to do. So obviously, as an author, you have to get comfortable with the premise, with where it's going, with how much control you may or may not have over both the setting and your characters, and different authors have different levels of comfort with that. I would say a really important thing is to look at the legal part of it as well, and the finances, and work out, just have all that set out up front, because then if anything happens down the line where you want to leave or take your books out of the series in the future, all those types of things should be provisioned for, up front, and no one's expecting it to happen, but that's the kind of thing that can happen. So I think that part, maybe as authors we don't necessarily like looking at that or reading the fine print, but it's really important so that you know what you're getting into up front and whether you're comfortable with that. Because the difference with a shared world is that the intellectual property is not necessarily all yours in the same way that it might be if you were writing by yourself for your own world, and your own series. So you have to get really comfortable with that. And some people are. Like, I was really happy to join the share world, and I absolutely love it. And it's definitely doing bigger and better and more creative things than I could have imagined on my own for a cozy fantasy series, which I love. But there are also, there are some limitations because it's a shared world and magic works in a certain way, and there are some things that you need to run by the other authors out of professional courtesy and to make sure it all makes sense. So I think as an author, it's a really personal decision what you're comfortable signing up to and what you're not. But I would definitely say be wary if there isn't a contract written down, or talk of writing a contract, and definitely have that in place before you commit to joining the series. And I think any shared world that I've heard of from other authors has always had that in place.
I think one thing that we should have been more aware of when we were starting the series is, for one, I think everyone is going to assume that they have more time to put into the project than they actually do. And so everyone is going to step in and be like, I can devote, 20 hours to editing, and they might have 5 hours to devote to editing someone else's book. Or it might be, I can for sure get this thing done by X date. And then things are going to come up and inevitably move things. And so I think that going in, we were very, very optimistic that everyone, including ourselves, were going to be able to stick to the commitments that they made and the time that they had, and all of the things that they thought that they could do when they first joined. And as you go, you realize that that's not necessarily true, and that can lead to frustrations, because it's like, well, this person said they were going to be able to do this, and now I'm having to pick up the slack, or I'm having to find someone to pick up the slack. Or this person said that they were going to be able to do this, well, now they're not going to be able to. And I think we expected some like life circumstances to happen. You know that there's going to be a family emergency, or there's going to be but I don't think we anticipated that people were just going to assume they had more time than they have.
Mm.
And so that was a big one for us. And then I think another one that would be a huge deal was really finding out what everyone was working on outside of this project before we committed to it. Because there were things, and I want to stay kind of vague about this just for the privacy
Sure.
of everyone involved, but there were certain things that some people who were joining the project were working on outside of the project that was kind of like something that was uncomfortable for other people in the project. And they're going, I'm not sure that I want to be associated with an author who's writing X, Y, and Z. And now we're being linked together in this project. Is that going to bring some heat to me or something like that? And then having to kind of navigate that and go, do we need to remove someone? If so, who needs to be removed? Who needs to step back? And having to kind of go through that, and that causing a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of problems. And I feel like some of that could have been cleared up if we would have just been clear from the get-go of, we need to know everything you're working on going into the project that you're aware of right now, because there's going to be things that come up.
Mhm.
But I think having a more clearer picture would have helped. And I think we just thought, as long as we know what you're working on within the group, it doesn't matter. And it's like, well,
Right.
it does impact everyone else once you enter into something as a group.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that being a definite issue. And, not everybody wants to write under a pseudonym. Some people do. Some people sort of separate their different genres or whatever with a pseudonym. But then some people are like, no, that's twice as much work, or however many pseudonyms you have as much work. So that definitely becomes a problem. But yeah, you do want to know what else people are writing. And I will say that for our series, the timing thing has been challenging from time to time. We had a lot of people who wanted to put out books all in the same year. And I said, all right, here's the deal. I am one person. I can only edit so much at a time. And we want everything to go through me as the editor because I'm doing both, you know, uh, grammatical editing, but also continuity editing and going, okay, you spelled this person's name this way here, this person's name this way here. We got to keep that consistent. And so what I ended up actually having to do was breaking down my timeline for editing and formatting and things like that, and saying, if this is the release date you want, I need your completed manuscript 3 or 4 months ahead of that. And just showing the work on that really, I think, helped people understand that, like, this is the consequence of missing a deadline, is that it's going to push your book. And so once people got that in their head, that definitely helped on that aspect of it. And folks have been pretty good about that since then, going, oh, okay, now it all makes sense why, Dawn wants these so early. All right. Our next question, what are some ways for authors in shared worlds to handle conflicts that arise, like use of characters, world building, or other aspects of story and continuity?
Yeah, so for us, a lot of that like use of character came down to trying to just focus on using NPCs where possible, and making sure that we could use those NPCs and those NPC businesses and stuff, um, weave them into as many books as possible. Because when we're not using each other's characters, there is a little bit less of that having to make time to check with each other and go, am I using your character the way that you want your character used? And because of how we formatted our author agreements, that kind of helped, like with kind of smooth out issues later on in the process. So for us, kind of emphasizing using the shared resources where possible, and then weaving in the extra stuff was really nice. Um, and then another thing that we really focused on was, if someone wants to use a character that someone else has, to really work that out with that other person first. If you're going to write that scene, have that person read over that scene. Make sure it sounds like that character. If it doesn't sound like that character, then you guys kind of try to work that out in kind of rewriting that, fleshing that out together, editing it together, and then involving kind of it was myself and another co-creator. We can be involved to help mediate that process if needed, but it seemed like it always went a lot smoother if authors were working directly with each other when they wanted a cameo versus, okay, well, I'm going to come to you as the co-creator, ask if I can have this cameo, and then you're going to go to this person and then ask, and then come back to me. And so it just seemed like it worked much more smoothly to have everyone kind of just directly communicate with each other. During the time that this was active, we had a Discord where everyone could kind of ping each other and bounce ideas off of each other and ask, hey, does anyone have a character who would be available during this time frame? Like our town had a fall festival, and so it might be like, hey, does anybody have characters that might be available to shop from my character at the fall festival? And if so, what do you think they might buy from them? And so characters could offer up their characters very freely in that moment, which really helped also smooth out a lot of those issues, because it would be like, I'm going to ask for what I need, and then someone else can volunteer that. And that very much helped the writing process go smoother, because you knew going in, this is what this person's going to buy. This is who I'm going to use going into the scene. This is the businesses I might stop at, because they volunteered it already.
Yeah, we've had a little bit of conflict over characters too, and a lot of it was really just people needed to communicate with one another about, hey, I want to use this character for this aspect. And we did actually have a situation where one person said, I'm not okay with my characters being in this particular scenario. And so we discussed that sort of as a group, and several of us said, okay, well, instead of these characters, what if you were to use these characters? And it actually improved the book in the end, because what the author needed these characters for, this second group was actually way better suited to it. And so it worked out great. And so that was really nice that even though there was the conflict, we were able to smooth it over. Just communication is so important in this.
The way that's worked really successfully in Cozy Vales is having it really clear what is shared content and what is separate content. So in my case, in the Saffron Vale series, all of my characters are separate content. And what that means for us is that if any author read a character and thought, oh, I'd really love to have them appear in my book, they have to come to me. So no one else in the shared world, they would have to come to me and say, hey, I really want to feature, I don't know, your main character in my book. And we would come to an agreement as to whether I agreed with that or not. And that would be written down somewhere. But unless that happened, there's kind of a blanket, no one else can use the characters that are separate or the place that is separate. However, there are some things that are definitely shared and they make a lot of sense. So there's a lot of guilds. There's one like that's a tea masters guild where they have a secret symbol, which is the teapot, pouring out. That's their kind of secret handshake type thing. And that's really fun. And that was one that I proposed as shared content because I just think that's a really fun thing. It adds a little bit of depth. Other people can use that as much or as little as they want. And then people come back with questions like, oh, do they have a symbol? And then we have a chat about what that symbol might look like and what's appropriate. So the other thing that I would consider kind of as an author entering a shared world is what are the things you really care about? So when we have conversations, often people have really strong views, myself included, but there comes a point when we need to reach an agreement, particularly for shared world things and how it works. So taxes, we had a really long Discord thread about taxes and how those would work. And there sort of comes a point where you have to think, right, does it really matter? Like, do I really feel strongly about this and want to keep pushing? Or is it something that I can accept a compromise on? So you have to kind of have that mentality that it's not your world, it's a shared world, and some things you might need to compromise on a little bit, and that is fine, and you need to work out what that is. And that's part of deciding where you want to go into a shared world or not, is how much are you willing to have that kind of discussion and compromise. And I'd say that's really important to consider. And in some shared worlds there might be someone who has like a final say over stuff as well, and that might not be you. So if you're an author considering that as well, like I would just think about how comfortable you are with like that level of someone else having a bit of control over your creativity, and that it's different in different shared worlds.
Yeah.
You also mentioned author agreements, which sort of segues into the next question, which is, are there any technical logistics that authors should be aware of, such as how royalties or copyright work? And also, if you want to talk a little bit about those author agreements here, that would be great.
Yes, there definitely are. I've mentioned already, it's really important to read the contracts that are there, make sure you're comfortable with them, ask any questions you have before you sign, make it really clear. And, you know, if you have ideas, so I've got a Cozy Vales one-shot role-playing game adventure, which is coming out, where are we now? We're in May, so it's coming out end of this month, which is super exciting. But the original kind of contracts didn't really have a provision for that because it was set around people writing novels. So me and Scott had a really good talk about, you know, how do we do that? What permissions do I need to do something that's a bit different in this world? And what's he comfortable with? So it was really good to have that conversation, and ultimately that's led to me being able to publish an RPG in a world that I really love, which is really cool. So I think that trust and definitely getting on with the other authors in the shared world really, really helps. But yeah, in terms of copyright, be clear who owns the copyright. Like, what do you need to say on your copyright page in terms of the IP for the world? And we have some standard wording that needs to be included, which is fine. You know, are there particular formats that things need to be published in as well? Like, it can get really detailed, and things like royalties. So I've already mentioned how our royalty system works, which is basically anything you publish under your own name that you publish is yours, but we're all benefiting from the world, and there are anthologies that we can contribute to as well, which have a different kind of royalty split, because those are free actually, unless you get the print versions. So if anyone is interested in trying out the Cozy Vales world and seeing a bit of what I'm talking about, yeah, there are free anthologies, which are a good route in.
For us, a lot of the way that we avoided having to get into the weeds with royalties and copyrights was our way of handling things was everyone published their own books on Amazon. And so for us, our agreement included a stipulation that the books had to stay on Amazon on Kindle Unlimited for 1 year after the final book was published. But that meant that because everyone was the author of their own book on Amazon, they got their own royalties coming in. That meant that we, as the co-creators, other authors involved in the series, were not involved in touching those royalties at all. So everyone was dealing with their own tax issues, everyone was dealing with their own royalty issues, and that made it much easier to not have that piece of the puzzle to work out as an overall series. Another thing that we did is in terms of copyright, because everyone contributed to the series in a lot of ways, and we did a lot of aspects within the group. Things like cover design we handled in the group because we did have people who were skilled in graphics. Things like editing we handled in the group because we had people who were talented in those ways. All of this was handled within the group. So for us, there might be someone who spent a lot more time on, I'm going to design the covers and put more time into this. I'm going to work on editing and put more time on this. We didn't necessarily pay out a division of royalties or things like that because we all put effort in. We didn't necessarily say, well, someone's going to get a cut of this because of that. In the copyright, we did put designed by this author for the cover. In the thanks, we did mention everyone who worked on it because, of course. And so when we got to the end, in terms of copyright, we all had kind of come to the agreement that if you had a cameo in someone else's book, you didn't kind of retain the copyright to that part of your character cameoing because you also had people cameoing in your book from other authors. And so even though that's technically their intellectual property, our overall agreement was we all had the right to use other characters to some degree within the series. Our agreement did say that after that year, from the date that the final book was published, you had the right to do what you wanted with the book from there. So we've had one author who has unpublished the book for personal reasons. We've had another author who, a couple of other authors who have taken the book wide because they're trying to get away from being Amazon exclusive, and I totally
Mm-hmm.
get that. We have an author who has gotten a grant to turn it into an audiobook, which is amazing. I'm so excited. So, A Milky Way Home by Sinju Chen is going to be on audio soon. So that's awesome. But now that that's been done for a year, everyone kind of has the right to do what they want. We did have to make stipulations that, if you want to write another book with the characters, you can, but you can't have cameos from other authors' work anymore, because that is series IP. So, and if you do write another book, you can't disparage the town. You can't like go through and say, "Oh, I'm so glad to be leaving Clover Hill." I mean, we all want to keep it like happy and, loving to the town overall, but they are your characters and you should get to go and do new things. If you want to take them on a road trip or a vacation, you should get to. And so our author agreement was largely, these are your characters. After a set amount of time, you're allowed to explore and take them out of the shared sandbox. But there are stipulations of if it wasn't your character, if it was an NPC that we all shared, if it was someone else's character, you can't take them with you out of the sandbox.
Yeah, we did not have author agreements for our shared universe, and people are still writing in it. And I think that having some of those agreements in place could have been a good idea. Our royalties and copyright, well, our copyright goes to the author. A lot of us will usually put a little bit in, like, such and such is the creation of whoever, sort of, the book is copyright to the individual author, but we'll put little notes about who created the characters. Um, and then because all of our books wind up coming out from the same quote unquote publisher, it's a small press that is really sort of self-publishing. We we do have somebody who sort of administers that account and distributes the royalties quarterly. And that's part of, we do actually have book contracts because we're doing them through a small press, and just to state, the author gets all the royalties once, the costs of, because, Amazon takes their cut. Basically, they get the royalties above and beyond that. And all of our books are wide currently. We did have one person who did Kindle Unlimited for, I think, 2 years, and then was like, yeah, no, I'm ready to take it wide because I thought that Kindle Unlimited would be a little better deal, and looks like wide is. All right, so then we have our sort of pipe dream question, which is, if you were going to host a shared world, you're starting from scratch, what would be the most important beginning steps for you?
Oh, that is such a great question. I think the first steps for me would be to think about location and kind of how big is it and how is it all going to interact. So is it going to be a single queendom like it is in Cozy Vales, or so like a single country with multiple locations, or is it bigger than that and maybe have authors having different countries, or is it smaller and everyone's in maybe the same town and they all have different shops or something? So I think that kind of scale of it would probably be where I started, and then that, I think, from there leads into, okay, well, so if everyone's in the same town, then we're going to need a lot of shared characters, and people might need to get comfortable with, they could see other people's characters that they've written in the bar and stuff, and that would be natural. Whereas if it was a more geographically spaced out world, there would be no need for anyone's characters to interact unless that was a specific like story point. So it's probably a bit easier to have people doing their own thing. So I think, yeah, I'd start with location and then figure out how closely woven authors who wanted to participate wanted to have their stories.
The biggest beginning step for me would be to really kind of hammer out those details of the shared world early on. Like I said, when we started our shared world project, it wasn't initially designed to be a shared world. It was going to be like a shared theme or a shared topic. And I don't think I had fully prepared myself for what it looked like to do a truly shared world and the amount of work that goes into sharing a world with all of its continuity and all of the potential situations that might arise. And so for me, if I were to start a shared world all over again, I would consider ways to do shared worlds that maybe limited the need for continuity, simply because that can be so much harder to coordinate between authors over a longer timeline. And I feel like you could have a longer lasting shared world without as much need for continuity. So I know like one of the ideas we had tossed around is having people from different places interact with one single character as a touch point. And I think that that might have been a way that we could have done this without necessarily having, you know, that same level of shared world that a small town inherently has. And so I think it might be fun to try a shared world on a different scope or scale than what I've done before. Alternately, I think that it would be interesting to try shared world on a more intense scale, like and go kind of full tilt the opposite direction, share the world and have so much more of the overlaps and continuity issues to see how that feels and to have to go, okay, if I'm forced into a situation where there's more continuity, that there's more that I have to kind of work out and be cohesive with other authors. How does that look? Like, would that make it an easier process than a handful of overlaps across a few pages? Because when we wrote the Clover Hill series, they were all designed that if you wanted to just read it as a standalone book, you could, because we knew there might be people who only wanted to read sapphic stories. They might only want to read like gay male stories, that might only want to read asexual stories. So we wrote it in a way that you wouldn't feel out of the loop if you only picked up one book, but that it would be enhanced if you picked up all of the series, because you would see these people and go, I recognize that person from another space. And so there's a part of me that's like, it would be interesting to write in a world where you have to read the whole series kind of to grasp all of the references, rather than having a series where it's like optional maybe to read it all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like the difference between, you know, the world that you wrote in and then like say a big like say the Marvel universe where you know if you miss a movie you may miss some references, or the Star Wars universe too. If you miss one of the shows you might miss some of those references. Yeah, I think that if I were going to come up with my own, I honestly would want to do either like a fantasy or a sci-fi world where you're actually doing the world building from the ground up. Because essentially, even though the shared world I write in is superheroes, it's essentially the real world. It is, you know, you can go down the street and see people talking on their phones, things like that. So I really like the idea of doing just sort of a vast group world building where like different people sort of focus on different things. You know, one person sort of figures out how the government works, one person figures out how the economy works, things like that. And then sharing all of that so that there's this big sandbox that is created from the ground up that you can then play in with your characters or whatever. Um, and one of the other things that is sort of, you know, our shared world started out with a single city. And more recently, as we've brought more authors in, we've sort of expanded that. And the name of the city is Cobalt City, like in the image there. And so we made a bunch of other cities that have different versions of blue in the title. So there's a cerulean city, there's a lapis, there's a cornflower somewhere, you know, like all these different places that you can tell that they're connected because of the naming pattern, but it lets you also spread out. So, you know, Cobalt City is on the East Coast. I've got Cerulean City on the West Coast. And so I'll write stuff there. And there's connections between those two cities because some of the superheroes have gone cross country. But at the same time, it's sort of its own little corner of the sandbox. And I'm a big fan of the corners of the sandbox, like the big sandbox in the middle where everybody's building the big castle. That's great. I'm going to go play in my corner and do something weird. All right, so that is the questions that we have. So we're going to finish out by, if you could please let our audience know where they can find you online, and if you have any final thoughts that you want to share.
Yeah, so you can find me online at jrhartauthor.com or at jrhartauthor pretty much anywhere across social media. You can also find me at Weren't Roommates Pod on Instagram. It's my new queer focused podcast where me and my bestie talk about all things queer media.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the easiest place to find anything about me is on my website, which is www.gemma, Gemma Clatworthy, CLAT for Tango Worthy. My books are all on Amazon in Kindle Unlimited. So I've got a number of urban fantasy series. I've also got this cozy fantasy series, which is Staff from Vale. I'm on all the socials, Gemma Clatworthy on Facebook, I think Gemma Clatworthy on Instagram, G Clatworthy author on TikTok, I think. So many socials. So you can find me all there. And yeah, the RPG, you can buy e-versions on my Patreon, which is G_Clatworthy on the Patreon site, or on my website, www.GemmaClatworthy.com again, and the print versions are exclusive to my website. So yeah, if anyone enjoys cozy RPGs and wants to check that out, they are more than welcome to do so.
And I am, again, Dawn Vogel. My website is historythatneverwas.com. And on social media, I am generally at historyneverwas because of character count limitations in usernames. And my book here, Sure Shot in Cobalt City Homecoming, is my alternate 1950s superhero with a much more liberally queer version of the world. My protagonist is a woman in a relationship with another woman, and I've just sort of smoothed over the 1950s dislike of queer characters and said, nope, they accept them in my world. All right. And then one last note from WriteHive. Thank you to the panelists and also the audience for watching our panel about shared worlds. And if you want more content similar to this topic, you can check out Writing for an Established IP, which was presented at the 2024 WriteHive conference and is available on YouTube. All right. Thank you so much.